Mr Carmody, you have the call.
Thank you, Chair. In just following on from your remarks before I commence, Senator, when I was thinking about what might assist the committee, I have one of my experts here on licensing and medicals, and we could, at the end of my opening remarks, very quickly step through the licences and the medicals to make it very clear to the committee, because some of the information that's crossed over in the last bit of testimony I think is quite confusing, and we could just very quickly step through those licences and those medicals and how they relate to one another.
We'll do that, but I'd like to open the batting with that, Mr Carmody, to explain. You heard them say we've got an apple and we got an apple, and the rules around this apple are different to the rules around that apple. You need to belt that out of the park or justify it at the very opening, and there may not be a need then to go any further into the difference of the regime. So we just don't want to take the time up with.
And yes, certainly, Senator. Well, let me commence, if I may.
Sure.
Thank you for the invitation, Chair and Senators, and the opportunity to make a brief opening statement. You might be aware that earlier this year we undertook a stakeholder engagement survey which showed a great result compared to our 2015 survey. Over 1,000 people were surveyed, and our results showed an increase to our overall satisfaction rate from 4.2 out of 10 to 6.2 out of 10. Now, that mightn't sound a lot, but as a regulator, we don't expect to get any more than 8 out of 10. So this result demonstrates the reforms that we're putting in place are heading in the right direction. I understand, though, that the committee is interested in the self-administered sports sector and the comparison of the medical and other standards for pilots within the self-administered sector against those CASA regulated pilots. Firstly, I'd like to start with the self-administered sport aviation sector. This sector has been self-administered for many years. They conduct limited operations, and their pilots and aircraft are oversighted by approved organisations that are required to meet CASA's requirements to be approved. These requirements include key personnel with appropriate qualifications and experience, procedures which specify the scope of operations and how the organisation will comply with the regulations and the manual of standards, maintenance of an appropriate structure to manage their approval functions, maintenance of an appropriate audit and surveillance system including safety management systems, processes to ensure procedural fairness for CASA review of internal decisions, and assurance of reasonable, reliable and non-discriminatory access to membership. Using RAOs as an example, and you heard from them this morning, they're a CASA-approved organisation and require people who wish to access the benefits they provide to be members and to pay an annual membership fee. In return, RAOs oversights members' training and aircraft maintenance. Membership also includes a level of public and passenger liability insurance. The level of safety that RAOs offers is less than aircraft certified, operated and maintained under the CASA system, and accordingly they cost less to operate. Consequently, RAOs aircraft are required to display a warning that persons who fly in this aircraft do so at their own risk, and that the aircraft is not operated to the same safety standards as normal commercial passenger flight. CASA Civil Aviation Safety Regulation Part 149, approved self-administering aviation organisations, was made on the 12th of July 2018 and will commence on the 14th of July 2019. It was referenced on a number of occasions today. The proposed regulations were consulted extensively, and it also went through the Aviation Safety Advisory Panel and the technical working groups. The regulations do not compel existing sport and recreational aviation organisations to become approved self-administering organisations. Existing organisations that do not wish to become Part 149 organisations can continue to operate under properly conditioned exemptions, subject to relevant civil aviation legislation, and CASA being satisfied that they are unlikely to have an adverse effect on the safety of air navigation. Such organisations will only be able to expand the scope of their aviation administration functions, that is beyond their pre-Part 149 approvals, or issue additional authorisations if they hold a 149 certificate. On the second matter, medical standards, Australian aviation currently has 5 medical certification standards with different privileges and limitations based on the assessed risk. The minimum licence and medical standard for a pilot wishing to operate in controlled airspace is a recreational pilot licence with a recreational aviation medical certificate, a RAMP-C. This requirement is the same for both an RAOS member, an AOPA member, or for a pilot with no affiliation to any of these organisations. AOPA has questioned why we don't make the self-declaration model available to pilots who are not members of RAOs with the same restrictions that apply to an RAO's pilot certificate. That is less than 600 kilogram aircraft limited to operations outside of controlled airspace. The reason is that we regulate 4 levels of licence, ranging from the RPL up to the ATPL, and there are lots of authorisations in between which we need to elaborate on. As you might know, last year we looked at ways we could provide more options for pilots to fly with less red tape. One of those changes is a new basic Class 2 medical standard. This provides for PPL holders, private pilot licence holders, in most circumstances to visit a GP or a designated aviation medical examiner who will assess them against the commercial driver's licence standard without CASA intervention. There are some limitations, including private operations under day visual flight rules below 10,000 feet, a maximum of 5 passengers, and a maximum takeoff weight of less than 8,618 kilograms. This directly benefits AOPA members. In fact, when we announced these changes, this is an important date too, Senators, in November 17, AOPA was quoted in Australian Flying magazine, and I'll quote it for you. The Australian Airline Operators and Pilots Association of Australia views CASA's decision to base the basic Class 2 medical on the Austroads Commercial Vehicle Driver Standard to be fair and balanced, and commends CASA on enabling the use of general practitioners which will enable pilots to access medical assessments at thousands of locations across Australia. Now that was in November 2017, Senator, when we announced these changes. AMROBA, the Gliding Federation of Australia and AOPA, who were here at the table a few minutes ago, also signed off unconditionally on the Part 149 self-administration regulations, which were consulted through the technical working groups of which they were a part. And I'm quite happy to table the document with their signatures on it if you would like me to. In conclusion...
So the inference there is that their evidence to this committee wasn't accurate?
Well, Senator, I have a signed letter here, which I'm quite happy to table.
Perhaps they didn't understand the full circumstances.
We'll let them, if we need to, we'll let them speak for themselves.
Senator, perhaps they didn't, but they had a shot, and they've made a number of allegations, and I'm just making the point that they signed off on this as well. We respond to all of AOPA's letters, to the best of my knowledge, maybe not as quickly as they would like. We get a lot of letters. And finally, Senator, I'd say that across some of the evidence today, there's been a fair bit of cherry picking, which is the reason why I would like very briefly to step through how this actually works, and also how licensing actually works and medicals in the United States and the United Kingdom, because that's what we do, Senator. I'm quite happy to take some questions.
Let's see if the senators are happy to have that tabled.
That's a signed document from...
That's a signed letter of endorsement for Part 149 approved self-administering organisations.
Yeah. So
and it has the signatures of all of the associations, all of the people who were there.
But just help me out there. So they've agreed that's a good thing, but they're not saying it's a bad thing?
No. Well...
It's just that they don't get access to it, their members.
What they're saying... Well, they could, Senator, if they wanted to be a Part 149 organisation. AOPA could, if it could meet the standards. What they're saying at the moment is there's a general criticism of self-administration, which I heard repeatedly over the last half an hour. I'd have to go back and have a look at the Hansard, but I heard general criticism of what CASA's doing in self-administration, which has been going on for a very long time. Part 149 has been consulted for many, many years and has finally been brought to fruition, finally worked its way through technical working groups, finally worked its way through government to be made. So my understanding, very clear understanding, is that all of these organisations were in the meetings where Part 149 was agreed. Nevertheless, if I may move on, Senator, if you want to get to the apples for apples comparison, I can bring somebody to the table as we can work our way through that very quickly.
We'll see if the Senator's interested in that.
Because you might want to get to that point.
Time at the end.
And
could I have the Secretary with that document? We'll see if the Senators are allowed to be tendered. But just before I go to Senator Brockman, Mr Carmody, just listening very carefully to the question I've got. We've had apples and apples, 2 apples. They say same people, same aircraft flying in the same space, literally, one self-assesses under 149, one does not. One has to go under CASA assessment. Are you suggesting that if they were to make application to CASA and they met those early requirements that you laid out at the opening of your statement about the ability and expertise and so on, that they too could self-assess off a driver's licence?
What I'm saying is that if they wanted to set themselves up as a self-administering organisation like RAOs, then we'd be happy to consider that, Senator. I am
hold on. That's different. The burden of my question was, can they do that now? The answer is, if they were to make application to you, you would consider it on merit, and it's possible that they could become self-assessing organisation.
If they were able to reach the requirements, Senator, yes, it is.
Yeah, in the same way that RAOs meets requirements, I imagine they wouldn't be any more onerous or less onerous.
Safety management, well, they are quite onerous requirements that they meet.
Mr. Carmody, just listen. Sorry.
But there wouldn't be any, sorry, Senator, there wouldn't be any more onerous.
Correct. That was the burden of my question. All right, Senator Brockman.
Sorry, Senator, can I just answer apples for apples, if I may, just to put...
Sorry?
There are differences, there are restrictions in the recreational aviation space. Senator, only one passenger, less than 600 kilograms, outside of controlled airspace.
Sure. Yeah, that wasn't in contest on the evidence. Senator Brockman.
Yeah, no, just to get back to the apples with apples. So we heard an example earlier where an older pilot is being questioned over his medical certification. It's been challenged. He then says, all too hard, goes to RAOs, is basically flying the same aircraft a few days later.
2 years.
For 2 years.
Could be flying the same aircraft if it's under 600 kilograms, if it only takes one passenger, or if he's only taking one passenger, and he's operating outside of controlled airspace. So a lot of people who cannot maintain their medical certificates, a lot of people can't maintain their Class 1. That's why we changed some of the rules for flying training for pilots to be able to conduct flying training with Class 2 medicals to lower the standard. But there are a lot of people in that age bracket who are unable to maintain that higher medical standard. And now they will move to RAOs. The market forces have dictated that they will move there.
But why do they have to go, why do they have to go and pay a membership fee to RAOs?
Because we're going to get lost here.
Okay.
No, just Mr. Carmody, please. Otherwise we'll only get halfway through this. What I'm understanding Mr. Carmody to say is the same person, the same aircraft, with the different testing regimes, only when you get in that same aircraft the second time, you are limited to what you can do versus what you can do in the aircraft number one. So there is a difference.
Correct.
You're going to take off from the ground. There's a difference in what you can do, where you can go, the number of passengers you've got in the back, and that's why the higher standard exists for second licence, the CASA licence. So if that assists you, Senator.